ระหว่างที่รอนะคะเห็นอาจารย์ธรรมศักดิ์มาแล้วนะคะอาจารย์คะและทุกท่านนะคะเอ่อถ้าหากนาวิเกตตัวเมาส์ลงไปที่ด้านล่างของจอนะคะจะเจอรูปโลกนะคะอาจจะคลิกเข้าไปแล้วกดที่เลือกเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะจากตรงนั้นนะคะก็จะได้ยินเสียงในส่วนที่เป็นภาษาอังกฤษทั้งหมดก็จะได้ยินเสียงล่ามเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะสำหรับท่านที่อยู่ในห้องนี้นะคะอีกรอบหนึ่งถ้าหากท่านต้องการจะฟังเป็น original language หรือภาษาอังกฤษนะคะก็รบกวนใช้จากคอมพิวเตอร์ของท่านเองนะคะเรามีหูฟังเก็บเสียงให้นะคะแต่ในห้องนี้ทั้งหมดจะเป็นภาษาไทยรวมถึงลูกแก้วก็จะพูดเป็นภาษาไทยด้วยเช่นเดียวกันนะคะเพื่อให้เสียงไม่ตีกันนะคะขอบคุณค่ะ Joseph, so for in this meeting room, I will speak in Thai from now on. So you rely on Kunjip to translate everything to English. So the voice is not going to be like hitting each other into language when if I speak English in the room.
Yeah, that's fine. Just for your information, Noor and Santuri are already in the room. So
Okay. Hi, Sanjari.
Yes.
Hi, Noor. Okay, we shall start.
Hello, everybody.
ค่ะพี่จิ๊บต้องจะเริ่มแปลแล้วนะคะค่ะค่ะใช่ค่ะค่ะก็ต้องสลับช่องไปมาเองนะคะอันนี้อยู่ช่องไทยใช่ไหมคะโอเคค่ะก็ถ้าหากตอนที่ลูกแก้วพูดไทยพี่จิ๊บต้องกดช่องอังกฤษเดี๋ยวขออนุญาตสักครู่นะคะพอดีกำลังพยายามดาวน์โหลดของอาจารย์เพชร
Okay, just to confirm, actually, we cannot hear like English translation. I don't know, interpretation. I don't know whether this has started.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, now
We
can
are
hear.
about to start now in about 3 minutes. Joseph,
Thank you.
please
Thank you.
wait for a moment. I am downloading the PowerPoint of Ajahn Pet. Just one moment. It's almost done, and we will be starting in about 1 minute from now.
Sorry, LK, just a polite reminder about the recording of the webinar.
Sorry, what did you say again, Joseph?
Yes, polite reminder about the recording of the webinar. Okay, well noted. Thank you.
We are start. Okay. I got your PowerPoint. Hello, everybody. Thank you, everyone, all the experts from Thailand and working groups from National Economy Management and also other organizations as well. Now, we will be beginning the meeting today. It will be like an orientation. Our agenda will be on indigenous and local knowledge that is related to the process of biodiversity assessment nationally of Thailand. Now, let me share my screen from here. Okay. Yes. Okay. Today, the agenda today, it will starts from presenting the introduction with Ajahn Pet, and then we will move on to the introduction of NEA process or the ecosystem process nationally, and there will be a small Q&A session, and we'll talk about a brief overview of Thailand NEA when we move on to the introduction of the scoping process of the study. And then there will be an interactive session, which will talk about Q&A on all the issues with Joseph, and we'll talk about rationale for engaging indigenous peoples and local communities in the process of NEA. And then there will be the interactive session and a conclusion. Let me change the PowerPoints here. Then I will be working the PowerPoint slides for you, and you can talk about the next slide already. There will be two parts. Would you like me to start on the NEA now or later? Can you give the overview picture first? All right, okay. Hello, everyone. And also, good morning, everyone from UK. Good morning, Joseph. Thank you, UNESCO. Because this project, we meet a lot online. It's a nice chance to see everyone in person. It's lovely. Thank you, UNESCO, for hosting the meeting today. The National Ecosystem Assessment is an initiative that initiated by UNEP and another organization. We would like to open a platform to assess the ecosystem to support the biodiversity, or the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's a cooperation between many sectors, also Chulalongkorn University and Marad and Chula Unisearch, and also the Society of Marine Science. We have partners that work together internationally. UNWMCMC, WestNet, and also UNESCO as well. Okay, now let me talk about the beginning of it all, of NEA. Actually, it started from a challenge. When you talk about the importance of biodiversity, it's happened for a long time. It's always been there, but it just started in terms of policy. It was often undervalued and also misunderstood. A lot of managements are done through wrong assumptions. Therefore, the process of giving importance to the biodiversity in the decision-making process nationally in terms of policy setting is very important. Therefore, it became a question how to integrate biodiversity and also ecosystem services into policy making. A suggestion is that for all state members to assess their own biodiversity on a national level, to create evidence-based assessment to really recognize the value of biodiversity. The 2 points are that for all the nations to realize the significance of ecosystem services across sectors. When we talk about the environment and biodiversity, sometimes it's limited to related organizations only, even in terms of the ministries. Maybe it was always limited to one ministry, but the question is how to broadcast and also make it more important across different sectors. And another point is to plan and strategize biodiversity management. These are suggestions or solutions that we got from the CBD. Now, actually, I would like to emphasize on this one thing, which is the process in terms of the environment. We might be more familiar with BIES. That is not much known. Maybe some people have heard this IPBES for the first time, but I think it's an example of how to mobilize globally to also bring significance on a national level. There's intergovernmental platforms that talks about biodiversity and also ecosystem services. It happened in order to synthesize the knowledges, be it globally or nationally, to allow all these knowledges to be used in policy-making processes. It began from 2012. There are more than 130 member states that representing the government. As for Thailand, it is also become our national focal point as for Thailand. From 2014 to now, IPBES have been producing knowledge products, many of them, which are significant, especially in terms of policy making. As for the IPBES assessment process, it covers from scoping, assessing existing information, approving and acknowledging each report. Once each report is completed, it will have to go through scoping, assessment, and also approval in order for the findings to be approved. Maybe it's similar to IPCC. When there is a report, all the state members cannot deny the acknowledgement because they were also present when the approval is taking place. Therefore, it would affect policies directly. We will then see policies that are agenda setting that happen from this. As for IPBES, a lot of reports, if you recall from 2019, there were a lot of headlines that talked about the loss of many species from the synthesis of the published paper and reports and also literature reviews. They concluded that almost 100 species are at the risk of being extinct. That will also affect the ecosystem services that we receive. This was just launched from IPBES, the 10th meeting of IPBES that talked about global assessment of invasive species. It was assessed that each year we lost more than $200,000 from invasive species. This is a clear example that is a result of national biodiversity assessment and also on a global level to see that the scale of the effects, the impacts that are happening are as significant to be included in the policy making processes. As for UNED, it has been supporting the national assessment. We have come to 3 tranches already. The first one is Vietnam, and then Cambodia and Cameroon. There were also in tranche 1. The second tranche is Cambodia, Azerbaijan, and as for Thailand, we are in tranche 3, Thailand, Malayu, and Argentina. It's in the 3rd tranche. They emphasize on flexibility in terms of assessing biodiversity. For example, Cambodia decided on assessing the biodiversity itself, while Malawi focuses on supporting information to reducing impacts in terms of the environment. As for a country that is an island may choose another framework or another scoping when they managed. As for Thailand, when we got contact, then we had an internal discussion and see that the ecosystems close to sea and coastal is rich in terms of knowledge for ecosystem services, especially when the beginning of the initiative was during the COVID time. So it's interesting how it will be developed later on, post-COVID now, how we will set the direction for NEA for Thailand. So this is our focus for Thailand. We'll focus on sea and coastal biodiversity. In fact, the process to accumulate information already existed, quite a few, in terms of economy and also the status for sea and coastal information. There is always a monitoring of threats constantly. But now there will be an opportunity for an assessment to look at the topic from the policy viewpoint and also the economic viewpoint. And another topic that I think is relevant today is how to integrate indigenous and local knowledge in biodiversity assessment and how we will be doing that. Okay, let's go through quickly. Let's look at the elements. We talked about the main is UNEP and committees that act as the approving body to approve the project, and also support from UNEP and engagement and the research practice from ILK. As for the core team, Professor Padamsak is the projector director, and Dr. Philip is the advisory. He's been working in Thailand for a long time, and he also is the editor. I is I am a project manager and Ms. Vipada is the project coordinator. In the blue circle, you will see the expert panel that comprise international experts as well as national experts, which are lead authors. The work processes. There have been many meetings. We had inception workshops and also stakeholder consultation at the seminar, marine science last year. Now the process is at drafting scoping report for the stakeholders to comment, and we will be also building a website. All right, next. Actually, there's two posters. You can see the panelists and the lead authors from อาจารย์พเดิมศักดิ์ อาจารย์ธรรมศักดิ์ อาจารย์ศักดิ์นันท์ อาจารย์สุวรักษ์ อาจารย์อรพันธ์ and อาจารย์นฤมล Each panelist is an expert, specializes in science and policy platform, focusing on knowledge in terms of ecosystem, that they have many experiences in the past, including sea and coastal knowledge. อาจารย์สุวรักษ์ will look at how to mobilize natural resources management, especially sea and coastal resources. อาจารย์อรพันธ์ will be filling in economics and the viewpoint on new solutions using economic tools. And อาจารย์นฤมล will be attempting at materializing the integration of local and indigenous knowledge. Here is how the website looks. It's still work in progress and we are still developing it. We would like it for be the main portal to disseminate knowledges from NEA and also the resources for people to access. Oftentimes, we organize public seminars, like here, as you see in the photo. And this is an investment in nature and biodiversity organized by UN Global Compact. We talk about NEA here too, and also our progresses. Here, our main priorities. We have the draft, we have scoping report, and we would like for the stakeholders to provide comments and see to tell us where the gaps are. We will be nominating expert groups. We would like to expand our list of lead authors because we see that NEA is an important opportunity to provide support for new researchers that they can come to learn about national biodiversity assessment and also new concepts as well as the engagement of the stakeholders. Our key challenges, I think, is to understand and to communicate to the general public about the NEA framework and the methodology because it's quite complex. As opposed in terms of core team and the authors, we all have been learning by doing when we designing the assessment process because we really want for it to align with the current policies. And we've been talking about scenario planning a lot. We have a list, quite a few lists, because we want to engage stakeholders and also we want to integrate local and indigenous knowledge. in the formal assessment process, as well as in the Thai context. Our questions is how to engage with the private sector meaningfully in terms of investment and also decision making. This Friday, there will be a seminar that talk about the assessments of sea and coastal ecosystems. We would like for the committees to approve the scoping report first before entering formally the assessment process in 2 to 3 years. Thank you. Thank you, Ajahn Pech. As for the next part, one moment. One moment. All right. Now, next, let me introduce Ms. Noa Noa to present on the introduction, in the process of NEA. Please, Kun Noa Noa.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. And I just want to confirm that you can hear me clearly in the room and that the interpreters can hear me clearly before I continue. That's great. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'd like to first start by thanking you for having me. Good morning from the United Kingdom. It's a pleasure to be able to meet you, even if it is remotely and from a distance. The aim of my presentation is to provide a brief overview of the National Ecosystem Assessment Initiative, which is based at the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre, or in short, UNEP WCMC, in Cambridge, and the support that we provide to countries around the world to implement national ecosystem assessments. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, is it possible to increase your volume?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, if we can have the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, the slide just before that. Thank you. Fantastic. So we'd first like to begin with explaining briefly what is a national ecosystem assessment, and I'm fully aware that Kun Pech has already covered some of these things, so I won't spend too much time covering them. But in short, a national ecosystem assessment is an expert evaluation of the current knowledge, our current knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem services, or nature and its contributions to people. And it may look at the different drivers of change, the impacts on nature, and all different aspects that are considered key to nature and its contributions to people in a specific country. And the aim of a national ecosystem assessment is to communicate complex information to decision makers across different levels, to support these decision makers to address different policy questions. So the aim of this assessment is not just to be a report that is put on the side, but rather that is used by decision makers to address key policy questions around our dependence on nature and the status of nature, as well as the status of the services that we derive from nature. And the key thing to know is that a national ecosystem assessment, it brings together available information and does not necessarily produce new research. So it synthesizes available information and identifies knowledge gaps. Next slide, please. And the key aspect of the ecosystem assessment process is to aim for different types of impact, so including building shared knowledge through knowledge exchange on biodiversity and ecosystem services, with a focus on policies and decision making. And a part of the assessment process aims to develop capacity and to share the lessons that we learn throughout this assessment process, both inside the country and internationally, where we are also learning from the lessons that are learned by our colleagues in their country context. And finally, a key part which Kun Pech has also briefly spoken to is supporting national engagement with international environmental processes like the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, also called IPBES, as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. Next slide, please. And so we will hear more about this partnership later, but this support is provided through a partnership between three United Nations bodies, specifically the United Nations Development Programme and the UNESCO, as well as the United Nations Environment Programme through its partnership with WCMC. And this support is provided under the umbrella of the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services Network, also known as BESNet. Next slide, please. And as mentioned earlier, through our support here in Cambridge, we've supported up to 14 countries so far through either to implement an assessment either in whole or just a part of the assessment process. But currently there are three main tranches or groups of countries, and the most recent tranche or group is that which includes our colleagues in Thailand and also includes colleagues in Botswana, the Dominican Republic, as well as Malawi. And so we are supporting national ecosystem assessments all over the world and learning from our country partners in how they implement and adapt the assessment process. Next slide, please. And as mentioned earlier as well by Kun Pech, that the ecosystem assessment process, it's inspired by the IPBES assessment process. And what we do as the NEA initiative is to support countries to tailor this process and to help to adapt it to the national context, to make sure that this assessment and the assessment process itself is best suited to work for each of our country partners. And so one of the challenges that Kun Pech had mentioned earlier, which is helping colleagues to understand and to communicate the ecosystem assessment process, this is hopefully made easier by the fact that the process can be adapted to best suit national contexts. And this is where UNEP WCMC comes in to support with this tailoring process to make sure that the assessment is as effective as possible. Next slide, please. And so what you see here is a visual representation of the IPBES assessment process. And if we can go to the next slide, please. And here is a visual representation of the national ecosystem assessment process. And here is where you see the different stages, starting from the scoping stage, which is the first stage of the assessment that explores how and why an assessment might be carried out. and it helps to define some of the key questions or the key policy questions that will be addressed by the report. And this is the stage that our colleagues in Thailand are now completing, and they will be moving on to the second stage, which is the evaluation stage, where we are evaluating or assessing the existing knowledge on nature and its contributions to people, guided by the questions that were identified during the first stage. Next slide, please. And so what you see in front of you here are some of the key elements of an assessment that an assessment may explore. So it may look at the status and trends of biodiversity and ecosystem services, which may lead to an assessment of priority ecosystems and the services that they provide, as well as the different drivers of change to these ecosystems. And Khun Pech also mentioned scenarios, so an assessment may try to develop descriptive storylines that help to illustrate or to show the different consequences of changes to nature or changes to biodiversity and ecosystem services, as well as changes that may happen because of different policies and then the subsequent impact on human well-being. An assessment may also have a valuation component where an assessment will explore the different value of ecosystem services, both from a financial or monetary end, as well as a non-monetary or non-financial end. So looking at the different ways that we value that we would value nature in Thailand and beyond. Next slide, please. And so ultimately where we are now is trying to establish credibility, legitimacy, and relevance through the assessment process. And part of ensuring this ongoing relevance of the assessment is by defining and addressing clear policy relevant questions in the scoping stage that are then answered through the next stage or the expert evaluation stage. And the part of ensuring the credibility and legitimacy also comes from this ongoing engagement of different stakeholders and different knowledge holders, including holders of indigenous and local knowledge, to make sure that this assessment helps to continuously engage different decision makers, key stakeholders, and key knowledge holders to maintain their interest and ownership of the assessment process as a whole, and to ensure that the assessment is well tailored or well suited to national priorities and institutional concerns. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I know that Khun Pech had outlined some of the key roles in the assessment team, but very briefly, if we go to the next slide, we'll show a quick visual representation of what are the different roles and responsibilities in the assessment team. So I'll ask our colleague on the computer to click a few times, please, if that's okay. Yes, please. So there's an animation. So we'll start off with the assessment co-chairs, and the assessment co-chairs are mainly responsible for coordinating the assessment as a whole, in the sense that they oversee the technical aspects of the preparation of the assessment, the process of selecting authors, as well as ensuring that the assessment as a whole maintains its relevance. Next click, please. And then we have the coordinating lead authors, and they are responsible for coordinating a whole chapter of the assessment's technical report. And so this includes coordinating the work of the lead authors, as well as the contributing authors, the fellows, and other experts that are engaged in the assessment. So coordinating lead authors, which you may hear called CLAs, they are responsible for coordinating the work on each of the chapters. Next, please. And then we have lead authors who are responsible for producing a specific section or specific sections or parts of the chapters, while the contributing authors, they help to prepare technical information that fits into these sections. And so authors can also include fellows, which are early career professionals that could benefit from engaging and working alongside more experienced colleagues. And it's also important to note that that lead authors, contributing authors, and fellows can also include holders of indigenous and local knowledge to ensure that the assessment includes the widest body of knowledge possible and widest range of expertise as possible. Next, please. And so finally, we have our external reviewers. So the assessment, in order to ensure its credibility and legitimacy, would also include an external review process. And so external reviewers would be involved in reviewing the first and second drafts of the assessment for quality, validity, and relevance. So I will stop here in the interest of time, but I would like to thank you very much and very happy to answer any questions you may have over the assessment process. And once again, we're very grateful to be able to meet with all of you today and looking forward to continuing our support. Many thanks.
Thank you, Khun Noor. Next, I will be inviting questions for a Q&A session. If you have questions, whether from this room and through Zoom, you can turn on your microphone or you can raise your hands, whether from in person. If you're in this room and you turn on your microphone, the camera will turn to you. If you are here through Zoom, please let us know whether from lead authors or contributing authors from Thailand. If you have questions for Khun Noor or Ajahn Phet or any other person in this room, go ahead and ask your questions now, please. No questions yet. All right, looks like everything is clear, crystal clear. Khun Noor, will you have to present the next part, or whether this is Ajahn Narumon first? Ajahn Narumon first, right? All right, if there's no questions, let me go to the next part, which is after this Q&A session. There'll be a brief overview on, oh, sorry, my bad, sorry. All right, after this section here, sorry, Ajahn Phet has already talked about the brief introduction of Thailand already as well. He have talked about this too. So next part will be the brief introduction of Thailand NEA ILK work in the scoping process to make the scoping report by Ajahn Narumon Arunothai. Before Ajahn Narumon begin this part, can you also introduce your team, the ILK team? Can you introduce the team members? Here in this room, we have Khun Paladet, Net, and Khun Sakunrat, Khun Varanya, and Khun Nattapon. I just call him Nat short, from Environment and Sustainability of Chula. This is the core team on our field work, working on writing the reports. There are also contributing authors here in Zoom, I see Ajahn Dr. Somridi, Ajahn Тэй, from Chula, from Marine Science of Chula. Ajahn Тэй, you can also turn on your camera. And who else? Who else? Who else here? Please show yourself if you are contributing author. I'm inviting the team after having seen their commitment and their dedication on ILK, because it's a challenge. Also, another challenge here just now is the flexibility in terms of working, because each country would use its own context. Therefore, the challenge is that there is no fixed formula. Scholars might feel that it is difficult because the processes or the time frame are quite flexible, but maybe this is a strength, or as it allows us to adapt, and it also allows new bodies of knowledge, encouraging international exchange, letting us see different working processes. And also tomorrow, when we have contribution from Malawi, we will get to learn from them. That way we can even experiment learning or working in the same way that they do. So working team, you don't have to be scared of all these technical terms. We will be learning together as we go. The lead authors here are also learning too. We are listening to all the experts again and again, making us feel reassured of the processes. Here, let's talk about indigenous and local knowledge in terms of lead authors. All right, let's go next slide. I will be introducing the terms here. From now on, we will be hearing a lot of the abbreviations. The important ones for indigenous and local knowledge is NEA, which is the core of our work, which comes from National Ecosystem and Biodiversity Assessment. When we talk about NEA, we mean the actions as well as the name of the project itself. Another word that we will be hearing often, depending on who's using it, but here we use ILK, which is indigenous and local knowledge. We can also call knowledge or wisdom. Sometimes there are different words for wisdom and knowledge, and they can be used interchangeably. In Thai, we can say local, or we can say local-based knowledge. Another word that we will be using often is IPLC, stand for Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities, which include the peoples and the communities that we'll be working with and encouraging their involvement. There is a background of the names, but I'll be telling you more when we get together in a small group. But here, let me introduce you the abbreviations now. Another one is FPIC, which is our framework for free, prior, and informed consent. This is an established policy endorsed by UNESCO itself and also used internationally. When we work together, we would like to encourage free, which means that it's not, then they are not coerced, they are not forced to give us information. Everything needs to be voluntary. As for prior, means that you would need to give notice in advance, not just showing up that day and getting information that day. If you have any plans to visit the site, you need to tell them in advance. Another word is inform, meaning that we need to be informed from all sides. And the last one is consent. I mean, we need to get consent from all the holders. When we are working on studies, scholars, we need review board that would answer to ethical questions to legitimize our reports, that our reports will not create any negative impacts, as well as are done in the context that we have their consent. This is a great framework because it allows us to work with indigenous and local people. Sometimes we talk about these concepts in different words as well. All right, next. Both Dr. Pet and Kun Noah talked about the biodiversity ecosystem assessment. What is it? It's to assess by experts. But when we talk about indigenous and local knowledge, who are the experts? The local communities also have their own body of knowledge, which we deem important, meaning that you do not need to be scientists, but the importance is given to social body of knowledge because the world is wide and we see different types of knowledges. If we were to interpret the word experts, it's not limited to people with a degree or is a scholar on that particular topic. Next one, to analyze existing information and also identifying gaps of knowledge. As it's been mentioned before, it does not need to be a new knowledge. It can be just simply identifying the gaps of knowledge. For the next part is our focus to identify policy-related questions on each topic, because the biodiversity has been ignored for a long time. There are so many different types of policies, and the policies that get the most attention focuses on the growth of economics, which do not answer to biodiversity and the ecosystems. So this is where the lead authors and the contributing authors come in, because they can provide these information. The next one is communication, how to communicate the assessment to policy makers. Because sometimes these policy makers need simplified information, as they do not always have time to read the entire process. So we would need to have executive summary, which is a simplified version, which can be seen as a negative, as it ignoring the complexity or some parts of the assessment. We do acknowledge that limitation. All right, next. On the topic of ILK and the scoping, the importance of ILK in Thailand, when we talk about assessing the ecosystem, ILK is often neglected because it's seen as something that is difficult to understand when looking looking at it from the viewpoint of policymakers. So it's also another question of how to build bridges between ILK and policymakers. So we need to work on that, and also to contextualize for the Thai context. As for the literature review, all reports who need literature review, we will be considering the concepts of sea and coastal resources and ecosystem. We might be choosing some communities, and there will also be assessments from lesson learned, encouraging international learning and knowledge exchange from different countries, learning from their techniques and how they overcome challenges. Next slide, please. Here, we'd like for you to see an example. We talk about this example many times. So we talk about Lipe, which is in Satun province. It happens time and again. And here it's another time that made it to national headlines. So that's why I want to talk about it as an example today. If we were to accumulate the local knowledges and map it out, this has been done many times already. We collected many stories from local seniors and the residents. We can see that there is rich biodiversity, the blue part, which is water, and this is also community area. We can refer back to this because back in the days, there was no information on Lipe, and there was no attempt to do any sort of mapping. This map allows us to go back through time and see how it was. This map shows that there are many sea people who have been living on the island for a long time, and it can be identified the farming areas and the areas and its character. For example, which areas are suitable for farming area for rice farming, wet rice. All right, next. Here, it's rich in its knowledge. If you look at Google Maps image, it's completely different. There is no trace of wet rice farms or the farms at all. If we don't have any records of the local communities, we would assume that Lipe has developed. Seeing that this development neglect ecosystems to the point that the ecosystems are taking back. There have been floods. It happened because of the construction cover the land area, not allowing water to flow through. So if we look at the maps, it allows us to understand more clearly. Next. Here is an image. It's a headline of Lipe of how the problem, the conflict happened time and again. Students are climbing walls because land is becoming expensive. People are selling and reselling their land. Those who have possessing the lands, they do not think about those who come before. They do not think about the local communities. They do not think about the indigenous people, ignoring the biodiversity and not thinking at all about the effects on the ecosystems. The photo on the right shows how the Lipe, the island people, they do not want to come protest right in front of the parliament in Bangkok because the conflict has worsened to the point that they have to leave home and come to protest. Here, you see the flood in Lipe because the resort blocked the waterway. Because before, what was the blue area, the water area before, the resort have putting land onto it, making the commodities for the resort itself. This is another part that we really give importance to, is the method of how to collect information. It's a type of how to collect information, to collect places names, to show the biodiversity and the diversity in terms of culture. You talked about this example many times. If you're a lead authors, you have talked about this before. If Sungai means water and Baru means many things, it can also mean new. It can mean the origin of sea, of the right. So the original names will tell us about the nature of the land itself. On the left, it says Sungai Baru, and there's an explanation of how people used water before. This is the current state of Sungai Baru, which is affected by tourism in the area. There is no water available anymore. But the interesting part is that the post-COVID situation, all the resources like this one is rebuilding itself. Like Dr. Pet talked about it before, we have to really think about the status of the biodiversity when policy making. Here, we see a cemetery for the local people in Lanta. There have been protests that they don't even have the security when it comes to where they die, not to mention the way they live. The name of it is Klong Song Pak. There is two forget. It's two frogget, but there's now only one side of the frog, which shows the changes very clearly, that the cemetery is now different. If you look at the Google map here, you will see in the middle, at the bottom, there's a small canal there. Soon, the canal might not exist anymore because of the construction of resorts. There are many canals in this fashion around the island. From this pattern, we see a tendency of the direction that the existence of these canals are being threatened. The waterway or the water exit way can disappear altogether. Next, here, the Klong Song Pak, that has now become the resort area. The cemetery is interesting because it talks about another new framework. Maybe Dr. Pet will invite the discussion from the lead authors. There's OECM, or Author Effective Areas, which can conserve the biodiversity. And it does not need to be a governmental protected area. This is a cemetery area. So people don't cut down the trees, and people don't transform the land as they would otherwise. It's a buffer that there doesn't exist anymore. because the symmetry is becoming smaller and smaller, making the space for the dead to be buried more limited, as there have been more bars and restaurants in the area that would disturb the ecosystem. We need to go back far about ILK in the Thai context because this has been neglected for a long time. We want to talk about the rationale of how to, of the governance of the conservation of the biosystem, because it encourages sustainability that would exist in parallel with cultural diversity as well. Now we can talk about literature review that has been done on the preliminary level. There's the Garden Toolkit, the Indigenous Garden Toolkit. As for the northern, the global north, there might be policy questions asking how it would be possible for local communities like the Lanta communities that they can communicate through an application. Maybe they can give an alert that a canal is being threatened. Draft and topics in the assessment reports. The core team have done the field work looking at the coastal and sea areas and the communities. When we identify the knowledge holders, we will be choosing the Seamen, indigenous peoples. They can be Thais, they can be Muslims, or they can be very small groups of people that use only very small boats without any machine, because we think that these particular groups are the most affected by the policies, and they are the ones that live the most closely with the ecosystem itself. So these are our chosen group. The process to accumulate information, to collect data and encourage engagement. We are lucky that we have been working with the Sea people for a long time, so we have the mutual respect. And there is a familiarity already existing between the communities and our working groups. So we can collect, as you see from the upper left corner, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Ratchapat Phuket, as one of the Ajahns, is also one of the contributing authors. If you look at the photo on the bottom, we see that when we talk about local communities, we don't talk only about in terms of tribes, so we can also focus on gender, because, for example, women might have they might be facing different difficulties, and they have different bodies of knowledges. In the future, we might be asking support from UNESCO to do 3D modeling or the 3-dimensional mapping that can be understood more easily. But now we are using the 2D map printed on the vinyl, on a poster-like material, so they can be telling us their name. This is a discussion group that is important, because when we get the data, we are doing the brainstorming. It's a co-production of knowledge. We are producing the knowledge together. We are facilitating the knowledge exchange and recording the knowledge. We encouraging the local communities to come together and share what they know. This is a strength working in the Thai context, because the Sea people here, they are very shy and they do not want generally participate holding a microphone or telling about what they know. This is a capacity building part of it, encouraging the local communities, especially the younger generations, to feel that they are capable, that they feel empowered. Here, drafting or topics. I will go back here in a bit, but let's skip here for now. Policy level questions. We would need to identify the ILK that we have accumulated so far, that we have reviewed, and see how they have been impacted by policies and the interconnectedness between the livelihoods of the people, whether it's sea or coastal area. If they live peacefully with nature, they can help conserve the biodiversity. Can we have any sort of indication in terms of policy making? Maybe we can identify the percentage of local knowledge that can be included in the curriculum in schools. That way students can learn about indigenous and local knowledge, or even a development of applications, mobile applications might be different from citizen science, that anyone can be accessed, but we see it that indigenous and local people, they live in the area themselves, so they hold the knowledge already. Some processes might be different depending on the context. Many people who, many contributing authors who have fell into my trap, that accept my invitation. Let me talk about my expectation. There is no fixed formula when we want to collect data. We'll be working together and asking for your opinions, because you have a lot of experience, you have your own strengths, and we think that all the other teams, they can help with literature reviews and also exchange knowledge. Maybe you have come across any information or article, we can talk about them together. We want the team to work together continuously in the future as well. We don't have many working people who are working on the team yet, but we want to encourage more in the future. Maybe we can talk about indigenous and local knowledge to connect maybe knowledge from sea people, that maybe some body of knowledge already exists and recorded differently. Maybe we connect the bodies of knowledge here. Another team is to organize webinar and also to build capacity. We really want engagement. We really want participation from everyone. There might be an article or video clips that we can be sending and giving comments in terms of the work process. You can also help us with video recording and giving comments. on related videos. The core team will be making videos in a series, and we'd really like to know the feedback. The next one, I like to advertise for BestNet. They have many videos on YouTube links, and we have also linked them to NEA that Dr. Pet have included. We have, for example, what is ecosystem assessment. We have English and Thai and also Southern Thai. These have been finished already, but we also have new videos that we need comments, we need feedback. So I will be sending the videos to ILK and lead authors and contributing authors for you to access and give comments. This is my last slide, I think. Thank you. Thank you, Ajahn Narumon. Now we are going to the next part, which is an interactive Q&A. It's a casual discussion. I'll be sitting with you. Actually, maybe it's not a long session because we want to have a longer session after Joseph's presentation. But now that Ajahn Narumon has already extended an invitation for contributing authors, and also the examples that Ajahn Narumon have talked about, especially the local names and also the relevant issues, they must be very diverse. It's quite clear. But when we see the depth of the issues, anyone here, whether you are lead authors of NEA or contributing authors of ILK, if you see any issues or any reflection, anything that you want to contribute, because we really need to be on the same shift now, that you have been tricked to be on the same shift, we would need to think about, like, from the experiences, whether from Thailand or outside of Thailand, is there any sort of experiences that need to be discussed? Let me talk about something after Ajahn Narumon. I think as for the process, the NEA process that we are doing now is quite interesting. As for the summary for the executive, that we need to accept that usually there isn't a lot of time for the policy makers to read extensive reports. The question is how to, when we talk about policy making, there's our seminars of lead authors, right? It's another topic that we need to emphasize, because oftentimes data is lost along the way, because for when we write summary for policymakers, the question is how. Another question is the challenge that has existed for a long time when we talk about the knowledge, the indigenous and local knowledge. Oftentimes, it still lacks quantitative data. So it is another type of knowledge. So I think it's an attempt or a commitment of the initiative that we want to integrate different types of bodies of knowledge into the process. That is a question that is significant in the academic context. We have many attempts to develop multi-dimensional biodiversity index to look at the elements and the value of biodiversity, not only in terms of ecology or the environment, but sometimes observations. For example, it's still a challenge of how to integrate these different bodies of knowledge in the assessment process that are seen as quite formal. Other than the local communities, when we talk about sea people, we can also talk about the people who are affected by the resources, which are the seamen or people who fish, the fishermen, how to encourage learnings between the users of the resources when changes happen, whether it's an observation or observation on quantity, how to encourage them, how to collect the data so it becomes statistics, how to empower them in practical ways that can be done in real life on a day-to-day basis. When we talk about sustainable fishing, that we want to look at traceability of where the fish have been caught, to detect the diversity of the species of the fish. It can be an indication whether the ecosystems have become better or worse. When we talk about when we got the yellow card and there's a ban of the commercial seamen, of the commercial fishermen, quite immediately there was an observation in terms of data that they have been catching more fish just within the limited time of 6 months through social media or from the discussion of between local communities. It's evidence-based data. For example, a fish that haven't been caught in a long time have been caught. So it's another body of language that answer to the fact that conservation isn't rocket science, meaning that if we are aware of how to use the resources to encourage learnings from the level of policy making and also the actual users of the resources, like the fishermen, of how to encourage this exchange of knowledge and how to interpret the data for the policymakers. Maybe there will need a higher level of flexibility, because we might not be talking about different changes in terms of climate, for example. Maybe there was a shift in terms of temperature that caused a different patterns of fish species. Now we see the changing trends, for example, the jellyfish that have been increasing, which might not be a good thing. And has already been an observation among sea people. So this is also another topic that I'd like to invite everyone to discuss. Nobody has raised their hands yet online or in person. And Ajahn Pet has already invited discussion. And also, as Ajahn Narumon has mentioned, now to progress along our discussion here today from the past 1.5 hours today, let me then move on to Joseph. Let's go to rationale for engaging ILKs in Thailand, National Ecosystem Assessment. Please, Joseph. From BestNet, UNESCO Paris. Please, Joseph, take the floor.
Thank you so much, ILK. Let me confirm again, you can hear me? Yes, greeting everyone from Paris. It's indeed a great honor to be here with you today. And thank you so much to I can see some of the lead authors have also joined us today. We acknowledge your presence and your support in the indigenous and local knowledge. Before I also get started, I would like to welcome and also acknowledge the contributing authors that are going to support the indigenous and local knowledge component of the Thailand National Ecosystem Assessment. Allow me to say that this is a start of our new journey, and this is just a starting point. So we may not be able to cover so many issues probably that are needed in the National Ecosystem Assessment in the context of indigenous and local knowledge component. But in case you need any form of support or issues or anything that you want to discuss or any training, please flag those to Dr. Pech and Achan Narumon, and we are happy to support as much as we can here at the global level together with our colleagues at UNEP WCMC. We're going to be talking about why it's important to engage indigenous and local knowledge in the National Ecosystem Assessment. And I think because of the time, we can skip this slide and perhaps we go to the next slide. For the next slide, we're going to have just a Menti activity. If I can request RK, you post the link of the Menti in the chat, and maybe you stop sharing the screen, then I'll bring up my screen. If you go to menti.com and then you key in code 3101 5009, or you can follow the link that RK is going to post on the chat. I think I can also quickly do it. Yes. Yes, you can. Okay, share the screen for some few minutes. Then you can also follow the link that I've posted in the chat. Okay, RK, I can see some few responses have coming, so you can maybe stop sharing and then I bring the results to the participants. RK, if you can stop sharing your screen, then I'll share my screen. So let me know whether you can see the results. RK, can you see the Menti results on your screen? No. Yes. Can you see now? I think it's taking much time to share. So here, there's no correct or wrong answer. It's just a basic understanding so that we know our starting point as we start the evaluation process. Because as Dr. Pech and Achan Narumon already said, this is also a learning process, and equally a learning process for us from the global team, from the team for the great work that you are doing. So the basic idea is just to have a better understanding of the indigenous and local knowledge components so that we ensure that we are providing the best support possible from the global side. I just give it some few seconds as we welcome more reaction from the team. And maybe I request the global team not to participate into the Menti. Sorry, Santuri and Noor, for excluding you in this exercise. If it's okay, then I'll proceed. You can continue answering Menti. I'll proceed to the next question. So the next question is, how confident do you feel in your ability to incorporate indigenous and local knowledge in the national ecosystem assessment. And here I would highly encourage the lead authors as well as the contributing authors that are going to help contribute to the indigenous and local knowledge component to contribute, including also the CLA or the coordinating lead authors. Just going to give it some few seconds. Again, there's no wrong answer. It's just a basic understanding so that we know our starting point to provide the best support we can be able to provide to the team. And then at the end, I'll also be coming back to this. We hope through this webinar, somehow it will be like a starting point that we are going to start increasing our capacity in the indigenous and local knowledge component. I'll stop sharing my screen and then I'll give back to you, RK, then you can continue sharing the screen. So we can have the next slide. So as I said earlier, this session is going to look why is important to consider and engage indigenous and local peoples in the Thailand National Ecosystem Assessment. Okay, I'm being told that I need to speak louder. I hope this is clear. If not, I'm not audible enough, please feel free to interrupt me. So first, one of the reasons why it's important to consider and engage indigenous peoples and local communities in the national ecosystem assessment is through their direct contribution to through their knowledge and also conservation practices. And it is well documented that indigenous peoples and local communities have quite detailed and diverse knowledge of biodiversity and ecosystem assessment. And this knowledge can help us shape our policies, our strategies on how we conserve biodiversity. Also, most indigenous peoples and local communities often have these ethical and cultural responsibilities through their practices and worldviews to conserve nature. And for example, in one of the IBES assessment that was released in 2019, it found that about actually 25% of the land are either owned or managed by indigenous peoples. And actually these figures would increase further if you consider the contribution of local communities, including what Achan Narmon was talking about in terms of the coastal protected areas. Also, indigenous peoples and local communities often have their own customary governance structures that helps in the conservation of the resources, and these can help enhance national resource management within the country and the context of Thailand, particularly for the assessment of the coastal resources. Within also Thailand National Ecosystem Assessment, there's an interest to understand the economic valuation of ecosystem assessment. However, the beauty of also including the indigenous and local knowledge component, it helps us to understand the multiple values provided by the ecosystems. So moving beyond the economic value so that we are able to, sort of provide the best account or true values or true contribution of the ecosystem services to our society, our culture, and livelihoods, including spiritualities. And for example, this has actually already been captured by the Thailand NBSAP, that is National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan of 2021, which indicated that Thailand traditional values and knowledge is already contributing to different aspects of the indigenous or local communities' livelihoods and product. The other aspect is the drivers. Because of their direct contact with the nature, so indigenous peoples and local communities may be directly or indirectly impacted by conservation policies. So as a result of that, they have the right to be consulted and engaged in the development of the biodiversity and conservation policies. Also, it has all been documented that there's increasing loss of both indigenous knowledge and languages, and therefore it's important to try to capture this knowledge in the national ecosystem assessment. And partly as a result of this loss, this also has led to loss of indigenous species, including some of the medicinal plants as well. If we can have the next slide. So apart from their direct contribution, also Thailand has both national and international obligations and commitments when it comes to issues connected with indigenous peoples and local communities, and as well as their knowledge. And here I'm not going to go into the detail. I know the country is in the process of revising NBSAP, but here I only managed to retrieve some of the information from the latest or available NBSAP. And you can see this is actually some of the strategies and measures that the NBSAP aimed to achieve by 2021. And I'm just going to highlight some few. For example, if you look at strategy 6, which aim to promote sustainable management of resources, of course, they propose different ways. And one of the way is they indicated that these management strategies have to be in line with the way of living as well as traditional knowledge. And then if you go down to the target, the overall target of the NBSAP, it aimed by 2021 that biodiversity related traditional database that can be used to protect the rights of country and communities that are in place. And the main question probably like the national ecosystem assessment could assess whether this was achieved and or the recommendation to the next NBSAP that is under revision. If you go to the next slide, I'm sure probably most of you, if you just click one click, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework that was agreed upon in December last year during COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, or what we call the CBD. And this framework, or what has become to be known as the GBF, is actually sort of a great groundbreaking when it comes to the inclusion of indigenous and local knowledge, as well as engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities. And there are so many targets that that connect to this. But here I highlight 3 targets that are directly connected to the national ecosystem assessment. And already Noor alluded this in his earlier presentation, looking at target 21 that aim to avail best available knowledge to decision makers on biodiversity and ecosystem services, including scientific, indigenous, and local knowledge system. And this is basically what the Thailand National Ecosystem Assessment aspires to achieve. Also, target 22 of the GBF call for effective participation of marginalized communities, including indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as women, in management of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Equally, target 9 that promotes sustainable use of the assessment call for the protection and as well as encouragement of customary sustainable use by indigenous peoples and local communities. And as we go to the next slide, and I think through this target, the national ecosystem assessment can showcase how this sustainable use can promote conservation practices. We can go to the next slide. I think there's a bit of lag. I think there's general consensus, not only to the environmentalists or the environmental policymakers, that environmental problems are quite complex and interconnected. We can do like some few clicks. So because of the complex nature of most of the environmental problems, they often require a holistic approach or innovative solution so that we can be able to address these problems. If we could have some few clicks, that will be great. So in understanding these complex environmental problems, we need also to open our mind to different worldviews, to different viewpoints and different lens. So if we are only looking the world or these environmental problems from one perspective, from one lens, then we are only looking at one picture or one viewpoint of this problem. And we might feel that the people looking from the other side, from the other side, they are wrong. However, if you open your doors to different interpretation, to different insight, we have a better understanding, and we might realize actually we are right, or we understand people from other perspectives. So in this context, particularly the indigenous peoples and local communities, their perception, their worldviews and viewpoints about nature and the evaluation of nature is quite different from maybe you and I have. So opening this word of door through the National Ecosystem Assessment help us to better understand the biocultural diversity and the multiple values, as I earlier indicated. But equally, through this constructive dialogue or partnership through the National Ecosystem Assessment, it can help us better understand the barriers, the challenges, and even break these barriers and build bridges across knowledge system. And Dr. Page already illustrated some of the challenges when it comes to trying to combine or incorporate scientific knowledge and indigenous and local knowledge component. And when we open our door through this, then we are able to compile or to gather all available information data that can help us better understand and address the environmental challenges that we are experiencing, including biodiversity loss and climate change. We can have the next slide. So the beauty about the National Ecosystem Assessment, when you open or what we call the multiple evidence-based approach, and we're going to organize another sort of a tailored webinar connected to this. When you combine different knowledge systems, it allows you to have the best knowledge that can inform biodiversity and ecosystem-related decision, action, and policies. And through combination of these knowledges, you can either complement the knowledge, or you lead to the co-production of knowledge or cross-fertilization of the knowledge so that you have sort of more enriched picture. And here, for example, I give one example. I know, again, Thailand is interested in one of the chapter to focus on the economic valuation. And if you focus, for example, economic valuation from the scientific point of view, and then also you try to understand the indigenous valuation of ecosystem assessment using different indigenous methodologies, then you're likely to have the true picture or true value provided by the ecosystems. Next slide. I think there's a bit of lag. So this is the advantage when you try to work with diverse knowledge systems. So here, when you talk about diverse knowledge system, we are talking about scientific, indigenous, and local knowledge. As already is said in the previous slide, it allows for the co-production and co-fertilization of knowledge so that you have more enriched picture that can inform biodiversity policies. And also it will open up the assessment so that you have like a robust national ecosystem assessment that is informed by all available information, data, and knowledge. And again, I have already talked about the multiple values and better understanding of the customary management system so that we can have that synergy between local governance and national governance. And it also ensures that the policy option are guided by the holistic views and inclusive knowledge and again, multiple values. Next slide. So Noor already shared the IBES assessment process. So IBES, again, is Intergovernmental Science science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And the National Ecosystem Assessment borrows a lot from the IBES assessment. And IBES assessment, especially when it comes to the indigenous and local knowledge component, is considered as one of the pioneers, the global pioneers, in terms of inclusive engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities. And I wanted to share some of the IBES experience and try to see what are some of the lessons that we can learn and and incorporate, probably incorporating in our national ecosystem assessment. And next slide. And I will share this, using one of their recent assessment. So just a bit of background, as some of us know, IBES, was established in 2012. Right now it has about 143 member states. And since its inception in 2012, IBES has recognized the importance of indigenous and local knowledge to the conservation and sustainable use of ecosystems. And indigenous and local knowledge is well incorporated in the IBES deliverables and objectives. And this also is included as well in the conceptual framework. And actually, we borrow a lot from this conceptual framework that I shared from the previous slide. And IBES also developed an approach to recognizing and working with indigenous and local knowledge in their assessment process, and this was approved by member states in 2017. And I'll try to outline how they do this, how they try to implement this approach in their assessment. We can have the next slide. So using one of the assessment that was approved last year in 2012. Let's have the next slide, called Sustainable Use of Wild Species, the indigenous and local knowledge component. If we could have the next slide, please. I think there's a bit of lag. Yes. Yes, thank you for that. So using the example of one of the assessment called Sustainable Use Assessment, as I said, that was approved in 2012. So this is how the IBES incorporated the indigenous and local knowledge. So they have indigenous and local knowledge liaison group that ensure that indigenous and local knowledge is incorporated in individual chapters as well as in the narratives. So this is sort of similar to what Tide and team want to establish either a task force or a working group on indigenous and local knowledge. And also they had a guiding question for focusing on the ILK for each of the chapter. And I know we also have in Tide and we also have a policy question specific for the ILK chapter. And also they did extensive literature review on ILK, and they had about 200 contributing authors for this assessment. Again, from Nuri, you understand like the role of the contributing authors, so I'll not dive into that. Apart from this, they organized 3 global dialogue workshops with indigenous peoples and local communities from the globe. First, in the scoping phase, they organized a dialogue to frame the assessment and identify some of the key issues that need to be addressed by the assessment. And then during the evaluation process, they did review the first order draft, as well as also reviewed the summary for the policymakers. Also, they had an open call for contribution that gathered more than 700 submissions on indigenous and local knowledge, both from RK holders as well as from the experts. And within the assessment also they highlighted some of the gaps that need follow-up, including what they highlight on the customary governance. Next slide. Next slide. Because of time, I will not go so much into this, but here I just wanted to show you some of the key findings from the IBES global assessment. Already this was released in 2019, so you can see the contribution of indigenous and local communities in biodiversity conservation. We can go to the next slide. So let's go to the next slide, RK. So in the next slide, for example, you can see from this message are extracted from the summary for policymakers. So for example, here they recognize the knowledge and innovation and practices, and as well as institution and values of indigenous peoples and the role they play, particularly in environmental governance and ensuring the quality of life. We can go to the next slide. Ensuring the quality of life. Restoration of ecosystem as well as sustainable use of the ecosystem. And then from next slide, you're also going to see some of the messages from the sustainable use assessment. I think there's a bit of lag here from that. Noor again shared the timeline for the National Ecosystem Assessment. And basically this is how the potential outlook of the indigenous and local knowledge timeline could fit in within your national ecosystem assessment. I think we have, from the scoping process, we have identified some of the indigenous and local communities that could contribute. We have developed the policy question, and now like some of the others has been selected. So the next stage would be to structure and write indigenous and local knowledge in the order draft through the chapter that you're trying to incorporate, as well as structure that in the summary for the policymakers. And as I said, we are going to work with you during this journey of compiling data and reading the indigenous and local knowledge component. And then eventually at a later stage, we are going to talk about the use of the assessment findings. Let's have the next slide. I'll try to finish within 2 minutes because I can see time is really going. So in terms of the other, I know already we have like other selections. So, but I wanted to write a little bit to highlight a little bit about the RK others and the viewers, and how this could be done. I know this has already been done, led by Achan Narumon. So the nomination could be done by the coordination team. Like this is exactly what Narumon did. And then also we could extend invitation to the IPLC groups and organization to nominate others who could also be part of the contributing others. Or the nomination could be done through the National Biodiversity Platform, or what Thailand you're calling the PSU. And then also we could look at some of the agencies focusing on the indigenous and local knowledge to to invite them to contribute. And equally, as I said, from the IBES experience, we can also open a call for contribution, especially where we have identified a specific gap within the assessment. Let's have the next click. So in terms of some of the factors to consider when doing this, it's important to consider gender balance, especially considering indigenous and local knowledge is held differently across gender, as well as regional balance. So like in terms of the coastal region of the focus that are well represented, are well represented. And because as we earlier said that there's a problem of the loss of indigenous and local knowledge, it will be critical to also try to incorporate youth, or what Noor indicated about the young fellows. I don't have to go to the role of the RK others because similar to what Noor was saying, but basically you could have like lead others, contributing others, as well as fellows into the process. Next slide. I think I'll stop at the next slide, and then we can continue there from the next seminar. So in terms of, thank you, in terms of the, please go to the previous slide. That will be my, this will be my last slide, and then the rest we can continue from the next session. So in terms of the establishment of the either task force of working group on ILK. So who could be part of this? Of course, this could be part of some of the, will be the lead authors, or contributing authors, or ILK expert and partners, and if possible, also to include ILK holders or IPSC representation. And their role will be to promote and coordinate the inclusion of indigenous and local knowledge in the assessment process, and also to liaise with the NEA coordination team, which will include Achan Nadumon and Dr. Pech and the team, as well as with us and the UNEP WCMC team where necessary, and lead the development and the implementation of the ILK work plan in different stages of the assessment. And again, these are some of the factors to consider: gender balance, regional balance, the size, which should be manageable, as well as an inclusion of the youth and elders into the process. Allow me to stop there because, as I said, like, this is just the beginning, so we can continue from there in the next session. So RK, I pass over to you. Yeah, and then maybe before we finish, we shall have like one more Mentimeter activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. You have another stage, right? The next process after this. Now we open floor for questions, for Q&A. In terms of discussion, we can invite both Joseph and Noor. Can you please turn on your camera? And also Ajahn Naramon and Dr. Pet and lead authors and contributing authors. Can you please join, and you can talk about your feedbacks and your opinions on what you have heard today from the very beginning, from the overview of NEA process as for in the context of Thailand, and also ILK situations that are to be included and integrated into our processes when we are doing our studies, including the rationale that we talked about of why to engage indigenous and local communities in the process of assessment. Where to begin? Can I give you the floor to either Kun Joseph or Kun Noor to open open floor for the discussion, perhaps choosing a specific topic that to be discussed. Who will go first?
Yes, I'm happy to start. Thank you so much, and really looking forward to hearing from the colleagues. So maybe perhaps I can start by posing a question to the colleagues, especially the new members of the team, including the lead authors. So when it comes to the inclusion of indigenous and local communities, which are some of the challenges that you envision and the support probably that you require from us? So maybe we can start from the challenges and as we transition to the support.
If you don't mind, can you turn on the camera so I can see all your faces to increase the humanness in it all? Hello. All right, let me turn the camera back to Ajahn Naramon and Dr. Pet. Kun Joseph, can you ask your question again?
Yes, if participants have other questions, they are welcome to ask the question, but just a question that are floating to the participants. So when it comes to the inclusion or working with indigenous and local knowledge, what are some of the challenges that you anticipate you are going to face in the assessment process?
If there is no opinion, let me begin. Maybe I'm looking at it from an overview picture of the process of the assessment at all. I agree with the inclusion of ILK that Ajahn Narumon and Joseph have mentioned that UNESCO has been attempting on including in that process. The question is how, right? How? Maybe UNESCO has experienced before when working in this context, but as for Thailand and also for coastal communities, both indigenous and local people and also the local fishermen, in order to get data, in order to get information, do we need to identify where these peoples are? Or do we only choose representatives of the groups? And another point is that to summarize for the policymakers, to look at the scale of importance, how to elevate the knowledge, because they look at these issues from the top view, looking at the national development in the big picture rather than looking at it from the ground level. And my question is how to highlight the importance for the policymakers to include the intrinsic knowledge from ILK, to connect it to scientific knowledge, right? Because I'm looking at it from scientifically as well. How to get the quantitative data in terms of values and experience to communicate it and bridge it through qualitative data. This might be a challenge in terms of management. And maybe I'm asking this to Dr. Pet as well, how to build the bridge between this to the policy level. This is a challenge that I see. And I see the faces of lead authors and contributing authors that are to join us. And I'm giving you my moral support. Looks like you are dedicated. You will be working closely together with the NEA team. This is my opinion for now. Thank you. Thank you, Ajahn Padamsak. Anything you want to add? Hi, I have used the assessment, the ecosystem assessment. And I have a question that like the unit of analysis, how to use, do we use a more detailed, a more focused, or do we look at it from a bigger picture? Because if we look at the diversity in terms of culture, we're looking at the island itself from a different angle geographically. They are different groups and they're different, and how to select the groups. And I agree with Ajahn Padungsak because I have worked interdisciplinary knowledge, and the data that are qualitative, and how to not just let them simply be stories, and how to quantify them for scientists who prefer numbers and stats. I really like how Ajahn Naramon present the map, because the map can clearly communicate the diversity to those who see the image. And I really like how you printed it big on the poster. And I think people who like maps really like this way of presenting the data. And the data can be understood more clearly. This is all I want to say. Thank you. Anyone else would like to answer the questions? Ajahn Naramon, would you like to answer this? Please. Yes. This is, I think it's a significant issue of NEA of how to integrate two bodies of knowledges in ways that the significance are given to both sides equally, that the knowledge are not just stories, but data that will be looked at and inspected. Because sometimes there will be invitations inviting experts like Ajahn Tơi from marine science that will talk about the work of local communities, of how to integrate the data and interpret them or even adapt them for scientific groups to understand the significance of the data. I understand that Joseph has another session to see how the link groups, the link group has always say that when you include scientific groups, they seem to have more power when negotiating. So I think this is a complex of our team will be working on. Maybe we will have new frameworks or new angle to tackle that. Before Joseph, maybe before you can continue your presentations, Noah, do you have any questions for Ajahn Somruddhi? Please.
This is firstly, I'd like to thank Professor Padamsak and Professor Somruddhi for the excellent comments, and yes, these are very much pertinent issues or key issues that all of our country partners have engaged with in different capacities. And maybe just to say that the wonderful thing about the National Ecosystem Assessment methodology, and especially through the technical expertise and technical guidance of our colleagues from UNESCO, led of course by Dr. Karanja, that there are different ways in which we can present qualitative information, whether from the social sciences or from indigenous and local knowledge indigenous and local bodies of knowledge, and so it does not necessarily have to be limited to quantitative data, but it can still be, as you mentioned, Professor Somruddhi, visually presented in ways, whether through maps or other means, to ensure that that all of these different forms of knowledge can be presented, understood, and used in different contexts. And so hopefully through our ongoing collaboration through the National Ecosystem Assessment process, we can uncover different ways, different methodologies to present these different types of knowledge and different types of data that go beyond numbers. Of course, numbers are important and critical, and where numbers do not exist, or it is not fully accurate to present data using only numbers, there are other ways, and I'll use this chance to hand over back to Dr. Karanja. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noor. Well incorporated. Thank you so much, Professor Padamaski, for this very, very, very important question, because this is the not even million, is $1 billion question to every national ecosystem assessment. And there's no simple answer to that. And there's right now, even as we are still navigating the process, and also through the national ecosystem assessment, you're going to be pace setters on how to work with different knowledge systems. But from my point of view, I think the starting point is first by acknowledging that the aim of including indigenous and local knowledge is not to integrate within the scientific framework. So we acknowledge that these are two different knowledge systems that have different validation processes. So you're bringing them together, but in the process of bringing them together, don't necessarily subject indigenous and local knowledge to the scientific interpretation per se, because in the process we might end up losing the picture. And as you said, like the policymakers, they love the numbers. They want to hear the numbers. But as Noor clearly indicated, sometimes if we just focus the numbers, we might miss the bigger pictures. And I think this is where, especially now, we can explore even the AI and other data visualization tools. So how do we visualize the qualitative data, which is mainly focused on the indigenous and local knowledge component, to be easily understood and interpreted by the policymakers? And this is where now we can be all innovative in the national ecosystem assessment. And I feel like to some extent, IPBES can give us some guidance, especially when you look at the sustainable use assessment, how they use sort of pictorial drawing to show how things are connected. So not necessarily the numbers, but policymakers are able to understand how culture is connected to health issues, how culture is connected to spirituality, to the livelihoods, to food system. So and how does this connect everything to governance? So with this type of visualization, it might present a better message as opposed to considering the numbers. And you also indicated you also asked about how to incorporate. As I said, this is the beginning, and we're gonna organize another specific session specifically for your team on multiple evidence-based approach. But I think somehow I've already alluded to some of the methods that we can do. But we know the indigenous and local knowledge is there in Thailand. Much of it is documented. So one process would be through the literature review. Much of it has not been documented, or like it is documented but somehow hidden, is not published. So this is where, for example, call for proposals could be beneficial, targeting those people, they might have data, but this data is not necessarily accessible. However, we know that much of it has not also been documented, and this is where Acha Narmon has been talking about the case studies. So doing those indigenous-led research so that you are able to document this. And I think one of the aspects she is more interested is the spatial knowledge, the mapping, because sometimes when you just focus on the management of the knowledge, but we don't understand the spatial knowledge of the indigenous and local knowledge components. So if you're able to document this or show the process through the national ecosystem assessment, I think also would be equally valuable. And I think also through this response, I somehow answered to question raised by Achan Samred on how detailed we need to go. And again, this I would turn it to Achan Nadmod, because it's a national-led process. The team determines what is national relevant and feasible within the timeline of the national ecosystem assessment. Thank you.
Can you go ahead and continue your presentation, because we are going over time already, but let me share the screen for you to elaborate on what Dr. Naruman has talked about. It can be examples to answer your questions more thoroughly as well, please.
So I'll be like super quick, because I know like already we are over time. So there's already some tool guide or resources that we have developed that can guide you in work with indigenous and local knowledge. And 2 of these guides is why engage with indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as practical guidance on working with indigenous. This guide have already been translated to Thai, and I'm sure Motekan will be sharing with you, or may have already shared with you already. And then we also have 2 other guides that are for the coming, and then also we shall do our best to translate them to Thai. So one is on ILK method guide, and also how one of the spatial method that is called participatory 3D modeling can be applied in the national ecosystem assessment. Next slide. So apart from these dedicated guides on national ecosystem assessment, we also have other guides led by our colleagues at UNEP WCMC that might be quite useful. One is on confidence terms, and this might help assess the what we call like the confidence of the message that you want to share with the policymakers. How confident? So how can you assess, for example, the confidence level of the indigenous and local knowledge component? The others is what Noor already presented, selection of others, as well as gender consideration and stakeholder engagement, a toolkit that can be found on the NEA initiative website. And maybe if I can request Noor to also share the NEA initiative website, that also will be highly appreciated. We can have the next slide. So there are also several capacity building resources that are already available online, and Noor again will share the NEA initiative website. So these are some of the tools, but we are available to provide you any training or capacity building support that you that we require. So please get in touch with us, and happy to do so. We can have the next slide. So this presentation will be provided to you. So when you click on the links, you can be able to click and watch some of those recording. And in case you want like more tailored one for the Thailand, we can also be able to do that. And then these are some of the participatory approaches that are available that you could explore in the National Ecosystem Assessment. We have what we call the dialogue workshop. For this dialogue workshop, we have dedicated dialogue for the indigenous and local knowledge and local communities, including what we call ILK dialogue workshop, working workshop, and community dialogues, as well as more collaborative sort of dialogues, what we call the trialogue, bringing not only the indigenous and local knowledge, but also the scientists, policymakers, and practice. And I know Dr. Pech and the team are already thinking about that one. I think also the assessment gives us an opportunity to conduct community-led research or indigenous-led research, where this research is less documented, and here we can explore also different methodologies that we can use, and also we can organize like more like individual focus data collection, such as questionnaires, semi-structured dialogues, or individual dialogue, or storytelling, or interviews. We can have the next slide. I think probably this basically it. Yes. Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. We have entered the last session of today. We have going through a lot of discussion, going through a lot of time, and we hope that detailed data that we talked about today will be useful for you, both lead authors and contributing authors, as well as fellows. Can I please ask Ajahn Narumon to say a word to conclude our meeting today and talk about the way forward of NEA and what we'll be working on. Please, Ajahn Narumon. Thank you so much today. It's the first day that we are getting to know each other, and we get to see each other's faces, and we familiarize ourselves, even though we don't have time to talk just yet, but it's a start that we get on the same foot. that to understand the process, that there is no fixed formula, and there will be different, the processes will be contextualized accordingly to specific country. When we talk about interdisciplinary work in universities, we really giving importance to new issues like climate change or different issues. It cannot be solved using one body of knowledge, but it needs to be tackled through different bodies of knowledge, and that will need to be discussion, and there will be platforms, and also courage to speak up, and also a courage to criticize in order to communicate, because sometimes people from different fields who have difficult times understanding each other. That way, we can start to understand each other and encourage interdisciplinary studies. And the word that UNESCO uses is cross-fertilization. That means we are within our own sector of knowledge, our own body of knowledge, but now we are coming together to co-produce new bodies of knowledge. When we, just like the image shows, that it really will allow us to open our worldview and looking it from a different angle. There will be many barriers. The first challenge, we will need to tackle it together by working together. The last barrier is how to communicate it with policymakers. If we have everyone's cooperation, all will be easier. UNESCO focuses on capacity building and ready to support. UNESCO and UNEP, UNEP are ready to support us. As for our own circle, I think contributing authors, ILK will have a live group. That way we can communicate, we can chat, and we can take our own part of the work. We can look at it in more in details of how indigenous and local knowledge and its site-specific different case by case. Customs are different when we talk about different areas, and it's not always representative, but perhaps we can recognize similar patterns that different groups share. For example, we can identify common problems that the Sea people have faced together in order to open up new possibilities. Thank you, everyone. And let me give the microphone back to Kuluga. Thank you, UNESCO, for organizing everything. Thank you, Ajahn. And let's conclude it but with a photo session, the Thai style. And can you turn on your cameras now so we can take photos together? Please turn on cameras so we can all take photos together, please. Okay. Let me take photos of everyone in the Zoom screen yet, and then we'll put everything together with the in-person meeting too. One moment, please. อาจารย์สถาพร คุณธัญญารา อาจารย์สุรลักษณ์ Would you like to turn on your camera? All right. One moment. Get ready. 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being patient with us. All right, that's everything. We will put the photo together with the in-person participants. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the ajans that participating, whether in person or via Zoom. And tomorrow we will have another session with Malawi. And I hope to see all of you again tomorrow. Thank you so much. ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you, colleagues. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for everything. It was a pleasure joining you.
And congratulations on the brilliant session to everyone in the room and outside of the room. Thank you for the brilliant facilitation.
Thank you, colleagues. Well done.
Yeah, yeah.
Have a great evening. Goodbye.
You too. Bye bye. Thank you so much, RK, for everything. Thank you.